Okay, so we're diving into some pretty wild stuff today.
Definitely intriguing.
You could say that again.
This one's, well, it's giving me chills just thinking about it.
Right. It's not every day we get to, like, peek behind the curtain of a place like the TCIJ facility.
And with these documents you've sent us, it's more than just a peek. It's like we've been handed the keys to the castle.
The keys to a very heavily guarded, maybe even top-secret castle.
Exactly. This place, it's dedicated to containing and researching these creatures. Threatening jailed anomalies, or TJAs as they call them.
TJAs, yeah. Catchy, right. But seriously, when I first heard about this place, I thought it was something out of an urban legend.
Understandable. But the documents you've uncovered, they paint a pretty convincing picture. We're talking about an organization that's been around for decades, operating in the shadows, dealing with things most people wouldn't even believe.
And that's what we're here to unpack.
Oh,
like,
greatly.
to understand what this TCIJ facility is really all about. So where do we even start?
Well, I think the name itself is quite telling. Take, Capture, Incarcerate, and Jail Facility. TCIJ.
TCIJ, right. It's not exactly subtle, is it? Like, they're not trying to hide the fact that they're locking something up.
And what's interesting is that they weren't always so focused on these TJAs. Back in '61, when they were founded, it was all about disease control.
Disease control. Like the CDC.
Similar idea, but on a much more, shall we say, specialized level. Think containing and researching potential outbreaks, developing countermeasures, that sort of thing.
So what changed?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Somewhere between '61 and '97, their mission shifted. It's like the world suddenly got a whole lot weirder, and they were the ones tasked with dealing with it.
Okay, so we've got this organization, the TCIJ, formerly focused on disease control, now dealing with these threatening jailed anomalies. But what exactly are we talking about here? Are these TJAs like aliens, monsters?
The documents are a bit vague on the specifics, but they do mention creatures with abilities that defy our current understanding of biology and physics.
Okay, so we're talking like superpowers, telekinesis, invisibility, that sort of thing.
Possibly. There's mention of sonic attacks, creatures capable of manipulating plant life, even one that can supposedly teleport.
Teleport. Okay, now we're getting into some serious X-Files territory.
It does seem that way, doesn't it? But even more intriguing than the creatures themselves is how the TCIJ categorizes them. They have this classification system: benign, erratic, vicious, and insuperable.
Insuperable. So basically, some creatures are so dangerous they can't even be contained.
That's the implication. And it makes you wonder, what happens when containment fails?
Yeah, not a comforting thought, is it? But let's back up a bit. These categories, benign, erratic, vicious, insuperable. It sounds pretty straightforward, but I'm guessing it's a bit more nuanced than that. Like, how do you even determine if a creature that can, say, control minds is benign?
You've hit on a crucial point. The documents suggest that these classifications aren't always fixed. A TJA might initially be deemed benign based on early observations, but then as they learn more about its behavior, they might reclassify it.
Okay, so it's not an exact science. It's more like, well, we thought it was harmless, but then it ate that scientist, so.
Something like that. There's a case mentioned, TJA N542, initially classified as erratic, but ultimately terminated in 2003 after a containment breach.
Terminated. So they do resort to lethal measures if necessary.
It seems so, and that raises a whole host of ethical questions, doesn't it? When does containment become inhumane? When does the potential threat to humanity outweigh a creature's right to exist?
Tough questions, no doubt. But it's not just about containment, is it? They're also actively researching these creatures. And this is where things get even more complicated with the whole BHOC facility situation.
Right, the BHOC, biohazard and other containment. A splinter group formed by former TCIJ staff who, let's just say, had a different approach.
Different how?
Well, the TCIJ claims to be against experimentation on the TJAs. The BHOC, on the other hand, seems to embrace it.
So we've got a rivalry, maybe even an ethical war brewing between these two organizations. That adds a whole other layer to this, doesn't it?
It certainly complicates matters, and it makes you wonder about the TCIJ's motives. Are they truly committed to ethical treatment of these creatures, or are they just trying to maintain a certain public image?
Especially considering they changed their name from the TJA facility after the whole BHOC thing went down.
Precisely. Adding capture and incarcerate, it's like they're trying to distance themselves from the more, shall we say, morally ambiguous aspects of their work.
Okay, so we've got rival factions, creatures with unknown abilities, and a whole lot of ethical gray areas. But what I really want to know is, What's it like inside this TCIJ facility? I mean, are we talking dungeon cells and iron bars or something a bit more, well,
High tech.
exactly. Thankfully, these documents you've got include blueprints.
Yes, quite detailed ones, actually. 5 floors, each with a very specific purpose.
All right, let's take a tour. What are we looking at?
First floor, administration, medical, and interestingly enough, a multi-level cafeteria. And the walls are painted cyan.
Cyan.
Cyan, it's an interesting choice.
Maybe they're going for calming. I don't know. But let's move on to the good stuff. Where are they keeping the creatures?
Second floor, green walls. Benign containment.
Green for go. I get it. And the higher we go.
Third floor, blue. Erratic containment. Fourth, red. That's where they keep the vicious and insuperables.
Red for danger. Subtle. It's like they're color-coding the threat levels. What about the fifth floor?
Fifth's all white. Research and testing.
So they're not just containing these creatures, they're actively trying to understand them. Makes sense, but how do you even begin to study something that might break all the rules of science as we know it?
That's where the technology comes in. The TCIJ, they've spared no expense. We're talking state-of-the-art containment cells, surveillance systems, specialized labs.
And given what we know about these creatures, they probably need every bit of that tech to keep things under control.
Absolutely. They've got layers upon layers of security on those cells. Key locks, keypads, keycard slots, the whole 9 yards. And of course, constant surveillance. These creatures, they don't get any privacy.
Sounds intense.
Yeah.
What about the staff? How do they interact with these creatures, especially the more unpredictable ones?
Well, they've got protocols, safety gear. The documents mention armored suits, specialized weapons, even sonic deterrence.
So we're not just talking lab coats and clipboards here. This is serious business.
It definitely seems that way. The TCIJ, they
Right.
take the potential threat of these creatures very, very seriously.
Which brings us to an interesting point. The documents, that they mention these ethical guidelines the TCIJ supposedly follows. Non-interference, respect for life, transparency.
Yeah.
But how do you reconcile those principles with capturing and containing these creatures in the first place?
Ah, yes, the paradox of ethical containment. It's one of the big questions that jumps out from these documents.
Right. I mean, it's one thing to talk about respect and non-interference when you're dealing with lab rats, but these are creatures that might not even grasp our concept of ethics.
Exactly. It's like trying to explain the internet to something that predates the internet by a few millennia. The very idea of applying human ethics to creatures that might operate outside those frameworks.
It's a bit of a head-scratcher, isn't it? And it's something we'll be diving into a lot deeper as we continue this deep dive.
Yeah.
Because for all the fascinating details about containment and technology, the real mystery of the TCOJ might lie in their motives.
And in the creatures themselves.
Exactly. It's tough, right? Trying to figure out where these creatures fit into our understanding of, well, everything.
It really throws a wrench into the whole equation, doesn't it? We're used to thinking of ourselves as the dominant species, the one setting the rules.
Right. But what happens when those rules no longer apply? When we're dealing with something that might not even recognize us as sentient beings?
It's a humbling thought, and it makes these ethical guidelines, the ones the TCIJ claims to uphold, all the more fascinating. I mean, how do you even begin to define ethical treatment when you're dealing with creatures that might not even grasp the concept?
It's a good question, right? And it's not like they can just ask these creatures for their opinion, like, hey, would you mind terribly if we studied your sonic abilities?
I highly doubt these TJAs are open to consent forms and ethical review boards.
Exactly. So it's a balancing act, isn't it? Trying to understand these creatures, potentially learn from them, but also contain them, keep them from wreaking havoc. And the whole BHOC situation, that just adds another layer of complexity to this whole thing.
Absolutely. With BHOC seemingly embracing experimentation, it makes you wonder if the TCIJ is being entirely truthful about their own methods.
Right. It's like, are they truly committed to this no experiments policy, or is that just the PR version?
It's hard to say for sure, but the fact that they changed their name, that suggests a desire to distance themselves from those more ethically ambiguous practices.
Okay, but name changes aside, they are still actively researching these TJAs, right? What exactly are they hoping to achieve?
The documents mention a few key objectives: understanding the origins of these creatures, their capabilities, and most importantly, how to neutralize them if they pose a threat.
Neutralize. That sounds a little ominous. Are we talking about weapons research?
It's not entirely clear. The documents mention advanced containment procedures, countermeasures, things like that. But there's also a lot of emphasis on data analysis, biological studies, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It seems they're trying to understand these TJAs on a fundamental level.
Right. Because if you understand something, you're better equipped to, well, deal with it.
Precisely. Knowledge is power, especially when you're dealing with the unknown.
Okay, but knowledge can be a double-edged sword, can't it? What if they discover something that makes these creatures even more dangerous? Or worse, what if they accidentally unleash something they can't control?
Those are valid concerns, and they speak to the inherent risks involved in this kind of work. The TCIJ is walking a tightrope, trying to maintain a balance between scientific curiosity and the safety of humanity.
A tightrope with some very high stakes, it seems. Okay, but enough about the big picture for a moment. Let's talk about some of these specific TJA cases, starting with TJA 204, the Scream Singers. What do we actually know about these creatures?
Well, according to the documents, they're kept in a rather unique enclosure.
Unique how?
Imagine, if you will, a 50 by 50 foot enclosure designed to resemble a small village, complete with a lake.
A village? Are we talking like tiny houses for creatures?
Not exactly. The documents describe a more naturalistic setting. Trees, rocks, even a small stream feeding into the lake.
Okay, so they're going for the whole happy creature, happy life approach to containment. I mean, I guess it makes sense. Keep them comfortable, less likely to, scream at us.
That's the general idea, although even with these comfortable accommodations, there have been incidents.
Incidents? Like what?
There's mention of a guard being temporarily deafened after a particularly loud vocalization. And then there was the incident with Dr. Redacted.
Okay, that doesn't sound good. What happened?
The details are sparse, but it seems Dr. Redacted was conducting an observation when something went wrong.
And by something went wrong, you mean?
He was found, shall we say, in several pieces.
Oh.
It was after this incident that the A204 were reclassified from benign to erratic.
Right, because benign doesn't usually involve dismemberment. Okay, so we've got creatures that scream, potentially to lethal effect. Anything else we should know about them?
One detail that stands out is their dietary requirements. Live prey.
Live prey. Okay, so much for the happy creature theory.
And the documents mention a rather unsettling detail. The A204, they have a tendency to play with their food.
Play with their food. That's both intriguing and disturbing. Like, what does that even mean in this context? Do they, toss it around a bit before?
The documents don't elaborate, but it does suggest a level of intelligence, perhaps even a sense of cruelty, that's quite unsettling.
Yeah, that's not exactly the kind of thing you want to see in a creature you're trying to contain. Okay, so we've got sonic attacks, a taste for live prey, and a penchant for culinary entertainment. What about TJA POI5, the poison that spreads? How do you even begin to contain something that dangerous?
Very carefully. And with a lot of protective gear.
Right, because a simple hazmat suit probably isn't going to cut it when you're dealing with a creature that can poison you with a touch? A glance.
The documents mention both physical contact and airborne particles as potential vectors for the poison.
So basically, don't breathe, don't touch, don't even look at it too long. Got it.
The TCIJ has developed specialized gas masks and protective suits for anyone interacting with TJA POI5. And even then, exposure is kept to an absolute minimum.
Okay, but what about the cell itself? What's it like?
It's designed to replicate a swamp environment. Specific temperature and humidity controls, even a system for simulating rainfall.
So it's like a high-maintenance terrarium, but instead of a cute little lizard, you've got a creature that can kill you with a single breath.
Essentially, yes. And it's not just the creature itself that poses a threat. TJA POI5 is also capable of, shall we say, weaponizing its environment.
Weaponizing? How so?
The plants in its enclosure, they're not just for decoration. They produce the same poison as the creature itself, and they're incredibly resilient.
Resilient? Like how resilient?
The documents mention attempts to remove some of the vegetation. Standard cutting tools were ineffective. Incineration was attempted, but the plants, they just grew back.
Grew back.
Like, instantly.
It's not specified, but it does suggest a level of regenerative capability that's, well, unusual to say the least. Okay, that's just not fair. It's like trying to mow the lawn, but the lawn fights back with poison. And we haven't even touched on this whole green dimension situation. What do we actually know about that?
Not much, I'm afraid. The documents are incredibly vague on the specifics. They mention an incident involving both TJA POI5 and another TJA, designated T319.
T319, that's a new one.
It seems this T319 is shrouded in secrecy, even within the TCIJ. The documents only mention it in passing, usually in connection with TJA POI5.
Okay, so we've got a mystery within a mystery.
Precisely. And the green dimension incident, it seems to be at the heart of it all.
So what happened?
The details are scant, but it seems there was an attempt to transport both TJA POI5 and T319 to this green dimension.
Transport. Like intentionally.
It's not clear if it was intentional or accidental, but the result was the same. A surge of energy, multiple casualties, and severe injuries to both creatures.
Casualties. Are we talking about, like, human casualties?
The documents don't specify, but given the level of secrecy surrounding the incident, it's not unreasonable to assume the worst.
Okay, that's officially the most unsettling thing we've learned today. And that's saying something, considering we've been talking about creatures that can scream people to death and weaponized houseplants.
It does make you wonder what the TCIJ stumbled upon with this green dimension.
And what else might be lurking out there, just beyond our understanding. The green dimension, it's like every time we circle back to it, things get a little bit stranger, a little more, I don't know.
Unsettling.
Exactly.
Okay.
And these documents, they don't exactly clear things up, do they?
Not really, no. They mention it, this green dimension, in connection with a few different TJs, not just POI5 and T319.
Really? There are more of them with ties to this other dimension.
So it seems, though the details, as always, are frustratingly vague. It's like they're trying to avoid mentioning it directly, but they can't help but circle back to it.
It's like a cosmic elephant in the room. Everyone's trying to pretend it's not there, but it's huge and kind of hard to miss.
An apt analogy, and the more we learn about the TCIJ, the more it seems like this green dimension, it's not just some random anomaly, it might be central to their whole operation.
Okay, now you've got my attention. What are you thinking?
Well, think about it. We've got multiple TJAs, each with their own unique abilities, each seemingly defying the laws of nature as we understand them.
Right, and at least some of them have this connection to the green dimension.
Exactly. So what if this dimension isn't just some random place? What if it's the source, the origin point for these creatures?
Okay, I see where you're going with this. So the TCIJ, they're not just containing these creatures, they're studying them, trying to understand them, maybe even
Trying to figure out where they come from.
and how to stop more of them from coming through.
It's a possibility, and a rather unsettling one if you think about it, because if this green dimension is a source of potentially dangerous anomalies.
And it's not just a containment issue anymore, is it? It's a border security issue.
Precisely. And one that the TCIJ might be woefully unequipped to handle.
Okay, so worst case scenario time. What happens if they can't contain it? If this green dimension or whatever's coming from it spills over into our world?
That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? And unfortunately one that we just don't have an answer to. The documents, they hint at the potential dangers, but they don't offer any concrete solutions.
Which I guess is kind of the point, right? I mean, if they had all the answers, they probably wouldn't be so secretive about everything.
True, but that doesn't make it any less unnerving, does it?
Not really, no.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when you consider what we've learned about some of these TJAs, the Scream Singers, POI5, even this mysterious T319.
Each one a potential threat in its own right.
And those are just the ones we know about. Who knows what else the TCIJ has tucked away in those containment cells?
Or what else might be waiting on the other side of that green dimension.
Okay, so maybe let's not dwell on that too much. I think we've had enough nightmare fuel for one day. But seriously, this whole deep dive, it's really got me thinking.
It does make you question everything you thought you knew about the world, doesn't it?
Exactly. It's like we go about our lives blissfully unaware of what might be lurking just beneath the surface of reality.
And maybe that's a good thing. Ignorance is bliss, as they say.
Maybe. Or maybe it's better to be informed, even if the information is a little unsettling.
Knowledge is power, even if it's the kind of power that keeps you up at night.
Well said. Well said. So, where does this leave us? We've got a shadowy organization, a collection of bizarre and potentially dangerous creatures, and a whole lot of unanswered questions.
But we've also got a glimpse behind the curtain, a peek into a world hidden from view. And that, I think, is what makes this deep dive so fascinating.
It's definitely given us a lot to think about. And maybe, just maybe, it's made the world a little bit more interesting, even if it is a little more terrifying at the same time.
That's the beauty of the unknown, isn't it? It has a way of captivating us, even as it challenges everything we thought we knew.
Well, on that note, I think we'll wrap things up here. But to our listeners, if you've got any insights into the TCIJ facility, the green dimension, or any of these TJAs, we want to hear from you.
Keep those theories coming. We'll be here, ready to dive back into the depths as soon as we have more information.
Until then, stay curious, but stay safe. You never know what might be lurking just around the corner.